One of the biggest criticisms of Kamala's campaign so far, which has been run masterfully, whether you like her or not, she's done a very good job of getting her name out there, increasing her popularity. But one of her biggest criticisms is that she hasn't been specific enough about what she actually wants to do, what she actually believes, how is she going to govern. And we even saw after the debate, a lot of the independents and undecideds who reacted to the debate even said they're like, I wish I got more specifics. Well, the Kamala campaign heard that, and Kamala heard that. And she came out swinging with specifics. She wrote a policy platform titled A New Way Forward for the Middle Class. And it was 70 pages outlining pretty much exactly what she's going to do as president, what the Biden administration did also, and then how is she going to carry forward that legacy. Without talking about the specifics of the program, because I want to talk about something else first, how did you react when she released this? Are you happy she did? Do you think it matters?
I am happy she did. I think it matters a little bit. I think it helps to push back against the criticism that she doesn't actually have any policies, that she doesn't have anything to do. I think it shouldn't be given too much credit, partly because of the actual substance that's in it, but also because a long policy briefing isn't the type of thing that's really going to hit a lot of voters' eyes.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there's a couple sound bites in there that I think voters can grab onto and remember if it happens, right? Like there are certain we'll get into it, but there are certain policies that are like, oh, what are the things that Kamala wants to do? You can list like three things.
That's true. I also
Right.
think like we had heard a lot of the makings of these policies before this came out,
True.
which is part of why it didn't feel like it hit that hard for me. Like even
Yeah.
though there were critiques out there that like she doesn't have any substance, she had given at least some substance, and she didn't give a ton more in this. Like we don't know all of the different mechanical changes she actually wants to make
Yeah.
to the policies.
We don't know how exactly she's paying for every aspect of this, right?
Exactly.
Now we know we kind of do because we know that she wants to get rid of the Trump tax cuts, which would add $2 trillion to our reserves
Sure.
over 10 years. But I want to begin with a speech she gave in Pittsburgh
Yeah.
a couple days before this came out. And during this speech,
I think it was the day that it did come out, because I
did come
remember
out.
reading the reporting at the time, like the live feed, and there were people that were at the Pittsburgh thing, and they were like, we were handed out this 80-page
I would
plan.
love to have a physical copy of that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's so cool. I gotta find that. Maybe they sell. I gotta get that.
Sure.
I'm a huge nerd for that type of stuff. During one of the UK elections, I bought all the manifestos of all the different parties in like 2019.
Yeah. This shit's going to be worth millions for you one day.
It will not. Okay, so let's start with the speech she gave in Pittsburgh, because listen, speeches don't really mean all that much, okay? Politicians bluster during their speeches, but what it at least does is it helps you define their priorities. It tells you what they're thinking about. It tells you what they want you to be thinking that they're thinking about.
It tells you what they want to be reported on them.
Yes. And so how she opens up the speech right away, first thing out of her mouth is prices are too high. That's the first thing that comes out of her mouth. First thing is prices are too high and housing is a problem.
I thought the first thing was opportunity economy. And because I think she said, our plan, I call it an opportunity economy. And the first thing that includes is lowering prices.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she goes off about the housing shortage, and which is amazing because no one has watched our first episode of this show. But when we started this a year ago, our first policy breakdown was on the housing shortage.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that we researched. And to see it highlighted at the national stage like this, be in the forefront of her campaign, makes me genuinely excited.
Yes.
It makes me genuinely excited. And then she starts contrasting herself with Trump. And the way that she does it is really, really great in my eyes, because one of the things that the Democratic Party has not been able to do effectively is actively sell themselves as the party of the working class. They are looked to as the elites and the coastal elites, and that they don't represent the middle part of the country. When, in fact, a lot of the policies, obviously, that they're enacting is talking about more taxes on the rich, lower taxes on the poor, child tax credit this, housing for you this. So, but they union rights and all the rest, but she really makes a strong dichotomy between the type of person that Trump is and who he represents versus what she is trying to represent. She says Donald Trump believes that our economy works best if it works for those who own the big story buildings, not the people who built it.
Okay.
And I love that phrase.
Yeah, I think the rhetoric was really strong there.
Yeah.
It's like not the people who clean it or are janitors in it, like not the people who live in the buildings or something along those lines. I am again skeptical though that this is actually going to, because the way you set that up is like Democrats have struggled and they've lost working class voters, something along those lines. I don't think
it gets any back.
It does. Like Biden has been making this argument for 6 years since he started his campaign. With the shifting political landscape, to me, it means that the union voters aren't going to be won back solely on this economic basis. So even though I like the rhetoric a lot, if anything, I think it speaks to maybe the ideology of some of these independent voters that are like, she's supporting more of a broader middle class economy. So it could help with that. And more than anything, like whatever the substance is, more like, damn, that's some clever oratory.
Yeah.
Like she's competent.
Yes. I feel like the Democrats have not been effective at just calling Trump an out-of-touch rich guy. And I like that she's just kind of doing that more.
But again, they try to. He's just kind of bulletproof from
right.
it,
He's just well, honestly, it's so funny because you talk about how, Donald Trump doesn't care about the people who build his buildings and all that, and then he goes and gives a speech about how he doesn't like paying workers overtime, and then actively defrauded people and did not pay them overtime.
Yeah.
How a worker could ever vote for this guy is absolutely beyond me.
He did his Twitter interview with Elon Musk, and he literally praised Musk in that for how he if they want to unionize, you just fire them. I love that. That's fantastic.
No, it's
unreal.
He
says that.
He says that explicitly,
Yeah.
and then unions are like, oh, maybe he's like a pro-worker Republican, and it's like, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
How are you getting? Anyway, this is not a bash Trump segment. But then Kamala Harris makes another point that I have not heard from a Democratic politician in a while. She references FDR, which is not new, but she doesn't just say like, oh, FDR about all this stuff. She says this specific point where we need bold and persistent experimentation. And she references that we don't care about where the ideas come from. We don't care. We all we need to do is keep trying new things and trying to solve problems through data, through this. And it spoke to me like she is looking for this enlightened administration that FDR was trying to get at, where we can have an effectively managed economy as long as we don't let politics get in the way.
Okay.
And I like that a lot.
I feel like I'm going to be ticky-tacky in this whole
fine.
conversation.
That's the point.
Again, I like the rhetoric, but at least I didn't see in the document where are the specific policies. Is this just rhetoric, or tell me if I'm missing something? What supports this?
Okay, so then let's get into that.
Yeah.
Because I think I have an argument there.
Please.
She has this document, 70 pages, and she talks about major 3 pieces of information, okay? Tax cuts for the middle class, lowering healthcare costs, and then a housing policy. She also has a large industrial policy related to the Inflation Reduction Act and clean energy, but I want to focus on the tax cuts, the healthcare, and the housing portion.
Okay.
And I'm going to start with housing because FDR says we need bold, persistent experimentation. And then you asked me, where in this document do we see that? And I think that there's a really great example with her 3-legged approach to housing production.
Lay it out.
First, reward communities that change their zoning laws to make it easier to build housing.
Okay.
If a community decides that they are going to make it cheaper, or that they're going to get rid of red tape and make it easier for developers to build in their community, you are going to get tax incentives from the federal government. Okay, so that's already encouraging experimentation because you're encouraging local governments to try to lead the way and chart a course in what's best for them. So that's one. And what is that? That's a supply side economic effect.
Yes.
Right? We're trying to increase the supply. Then she wants to increase the supply again by giving a tax credit to builders. And these builders, if they sell to a first-time home buyer, will get money to build that house as long as they are selling to a first-time home buyer. Okay? So that's another supply side incentive.
Okay. That doesn't really follow the experimentation side.
And then here's the other side. She wants to do a $25,000 tax cut for a first-time down payment.
Yeah.
For a first-time home buyer, if you buy a house, you're going to get a $25,000 down payment from the federal government. Okay, that's a demand-side economic effect. And what that looks like to me is she's throwing everything at the wall and is going to see what sticks. And that's exactly what FDR did during the Great Depression. There was no ideology. There was no liberal bastion FDR. That's all made up nonsense. Okay, that's post 1936 FDR. 1933 FDR, 1934 FDR was try everything, find out what works, and then do it again. And what I see here is that's what Kamala's doing with the housing plan. We are going to try literally everything to make housing cheaper. And we're also going to give more money to the low income housing tax credit. And so it's just a funnel of incentives going to increasing the supply, increasing the demand, trying to get people into homes. And I think that is the experimentation that she's trying to lay out there.
Okay. I think
you're skeptical.
Yeah,
here.
I think your argument's pretty weak.
You really, what?
Yeah. I mean, she's doing multiple things, but this isn't crazy. It's let's throw money into the demand side. Let's throw money into the supply side. I mean, you can say throwing money into the supply side as far as dismantling the red tape is different, is like kind of unique in a way,
because she's spurring competition for different policies at local levels.
Yes, exactly, because she's leading into other actors to choose how to she's incentivizing experimentation from them.
Yes.
To me, like the saying subsidy for this in this particular way and subsidy in this particular way doesn't really follow the message of we want like radical experimentation, or I forget exactly what the wording was.
Bold, persistent experimentation.
The other thing is you say like she's throwing everything at the wall, but I was thinking about things that she's not throwing at the wall. Like she doesn't make a mention of any kind of social, or how do I say it?
Public housing. Yes, she does not mention that. She doesn't mention getting rid of the Fair Cloth Amendment.
She's not trying to like incentivize research on ways to lower the cost of construction. Like we're not trying to advance technology in that way. I think that as president, she would be a big proponent. Like we know that she's a big proponent of small businesses. I'm sure we're going to get into that.
Yep.
And I do think that will kind of fuel experimentation, but I don't think the housing angle is the super best way to put it. And I'm also not 100%. I don't know how much this differentiates her from what a Trump presidency would be.
Oh,
because the Trump presidency the campaign at least has also said that they want to cut red tape for housing, and this is one of the places where I think that Kamala's messaging is still not very specific. Like it's like we want to cut red tape for housing. And we're going to fund communities that do that, but we don't know exactly what red tape she's aiming for. Like there's a ton.
Well,
there's
zoning
so
is
research.
one that she definitely is aiming for.
But zoning's super broad. I'm saying.
Well, if zoning super broad,
is it just that like when you're running for president, you can't try to say anything that's more like you're not talking to policy wonks. So,
yes, but also on this other part, like the Republican Party is actively anti a zoning reform strategy that gets rid of single family zoning, right?
Yes.
The Republican Party has no incentive and has no desire, actually the opposite incentive to get rid of all of that. So I think when you say like the housing policies won't be different, I mean, I strongly disagree with that.
I think the policies will be, but as far as what the campaigns have outlined, like they both, their rhetoric is basically both, we're going to cut red tape to enable more housing to be built. And even though we know historically, because of what they said in the past, that Republicans will kind of try to protect the single family suburb as much as possible, that I'm not so sure the Democrats are going to be so open to tearing that down, right? Like you said, she's not talking about repealing the Fair Cloth Amendment.
That's fine. But how do you feel about like the $25,000 down payment support and the tax cut to to builders?
The tax cut to builders, I like. I don't know if it's so important to isolate that to first-time home buyers. I think like because you're putting more money into the low-income housing tax credit is better. Probably putting more of that money into the low-income housing tax credit is better.
You don't believe. We've talked about this on another show, but let's not get sidetracked here. But we've talked about how you don't think housing is that big of an important factor, and like it doesn't really matter who owns the house. all that matters is like, even if you're renting at a reasonable price, that's probably better off for you anyway than owning the home.
Yes.
Right?
I don't think home ownership is an imperative.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay. So then what you don't like the down payment support idea?
No.
Yes. So I've done research on the down payment support thing, and let's not go all the way into it, but New Zealand has a down payment support program.
Yeah.
And
I know you're more open to it because you are more of an evangelist for home ownership as a way to build personal wealth.
And that if that's the way, yes, if that's where you're coming from with it, then I understand your skepticism. But what I've seen is the research does not indicate that down payment support leads to automatic increase in home prices as long as the supply is growing at a reasonable rate.
Sure.
Yes.
And I don't, and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with accepting that. But as long as I want a system that is more reactive, rather than a policy that's going to pump money into first-time home buyers and just home buyers in general, because it's not right now. It's not what our system needs. We don't need more money to buy homes.
We just need more homes.
We just need more homes.
Yeah.
And we also, I mean, I don't know. I hate to be the fiscal conservative, but it's not something that we need to add to our deficit.
No, I get that.
Right?
No,
that's going to be a big cost.
I get that. The cost, I understand where you're coming from. I don't think that the cost at the end of the day it would be that high.
Maybe not.
Right?
Maybe 10 billion, something like that.
Lower. But yes, it would. But I understand what you're saying. If home ownership is not this necessary thing, which is up in the air, that's a whole reasonable debate.
Yeah.
Then a down payment support isn't really necessary at all.
Sure.
Why are we subsidizing home ownership again and not renters, when renters are probably the ones that are going to have more struggle paying their bills anyway?
Yes.
Right. So there are caveats to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the housing portion.
Yeah.
which that was a great segment.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the tax cut situation. She focuses in on two major tax cuts: the child tax credit and tripling the earned income tax credit. Both of those things I incredibly support.
Okay.
I support increasing the earned income tax credit. I think it's important to obviously incentivize work. And currently we don't have an earned income tax credit for people who are single, and only give it to people who have children. And that's a big flaw.
I agree.
And so she wants to expand that to people who don't have children, and then that would affect like a whole host of people. It would mostly affect people in rural areas, because those are the ones who are making at that sub margin that makes them qualify for the earned income tax credit.
Okay.
And it would most likely benefit non-college educated people, which is another area of people that need more fiscal support and more tax cuts than the people who are making, $100,000 in the middle of Boston.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And then the child tax credit, which is something I incredibly support. During the American Rescue Plan in 2021, the Biden-Harris administration passed $3,600 child tax credit throughout the year. It was paid out monthly. So the 15th of every month, you got a check in the mail. That expired in 2022. She wants to bring that back and then expand it. So the first year of your child's life, you get a $6,000 tax credit, and that's going to help you, get your crib, get your car seat, everything you need for a child, which is something that a lot of countries in Europe do. They call it a baby box, and the government will send you a box full of baby supplies, and you'll just be good to go.
So describe to me why you are so in support of the expanded child tax credit.
Yes, good question. So the expanded child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan in 2021 reduced childhood poverty in the United States by 41%. It reduced childhood poverty for African American people by 60%, Hispanic by 50%. So a huge and rural white people by like 55%. Okay, excuse me. I'm still getting over COVID or a cold. So these child tax credits have been very, very obvious at reducing poverty. When we look at how the parents spent the money, the studies have shown that it goes to buying the children books, food, clothing, and toys. It's not like the parents are buying alcohol and drugs with it. In fact, during these studies, it actually indicated that parents were spending less money on alcohol after getting this money.
Interesting.
Yes, and maybe that comes from less despair because they're actually able to take care of their child. So that's a huge reason why I'm in favor of the child tax credit. It's expensive to have kids in America, and the government should totally incentivize it. Another reason, for every dollar that you spend in a child's early development, you get paid $15 more later on because of the increase in that child's productivity as a worker later on in life.
Yes.
So it's a massive investment into the human capital of this country, and we are nothing without our human capital. That's why I'm a favorite child tax credit.
I completely agree. I just wanted to hear how you would articulate it.
Yeah.
You hit every point that I would hit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's her tax credit proposal, tax cut proposal. And then when we look at what she wants to do with raising taxes, she wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28%. She wants to raise the capital gains rate for people who make over $1 million a year. A whole host of things, using the money, taxing the rich, making sure that more money out of our economy that gets created, that gets generated, is going to the people who actually built the skyscrapers.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's her whole philosophy. Do you want to move to healthcare?
Go for it.
Yes. Okay. The healthcare, she basically focuses on two main things. Okay. She wants to tackle prescription drug costs, and she wants to tackle medical debt. To tackle prescription drug costs, she wants to expedite the ability for Medicare to negotiate these drug prices. We know that so if you're unaware, the Inflation Reduction Act for the first time allowed Medicare to negotiate the prices that they were going to pay to pharmaceutical companies to get their product. Previously, before the Inflation Reduction Act, this was illegal. You couldn't do that. So now we can. And the timetables are kind of underwhelming. It's like 7 drugs a year for like a decade in order to get this done. She wants to expedite the process, try to make it 9 drugs a year, try to make it 10 drugs a year, do what she can to make that more expedited. Okay. And she also wants to tackle medical debt. 41% of people in this country have medical debt. And it causes about, if you have medical debt on your record, your credit score is likely on average to be 20 points lower than it would otherwise. This is impacting your interest rate on your credit card, on your car loan, on everything. Okay. So what she wants to do is then use money and partner with hospitals and local governments in order to expunge a lot of this medical debt, which is actually kind of cheap, because when you expunge medical debt, you do not have to pay the overall balance of the debt, because a lot of these hospitals know that if they don't take this deal, they're never going to see any of the money anyway. So a lot of these hospitals are willing to take 10% of the overall debt to cancel 100% of the debt.
I see.
And so that's been very effective. With the American Rescue Plan, they were able to cancel debt for 3 million people for only $7 billion at a huge premium to how much debt was actually being held by those 3 million people.
Yeah. Do you think the cancellation or the wiping off of medical debt from someone's credit score, what are the knock-on effects that you might be worried about?
There are a few. I mean, it's definitely I think it's the worst way to get to universal health care in this country. If you're going to expunge my medical debt from my credit score, why would I pay my medical debt? There's really no incentive for me to do so, which would cause a lot of problems for a ton of hospitals.
Yeah.
Okay. But also, if a lot of it is getting picked up by insurance companies and more people are insured, theoretically, there should be less medical debt out there in the first place, because less people should be paying for stuff out of pocket. But that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're looking at like high deductible plans or copays. Do you know what I'm trying to say with this, or you're very skeptical?
I'm maybe I'm dumb.
No,
Say
you're
it
not
again.
dumb.
Say it again.
You're not dumb. If more people are insured,
Yes.
less people are paying for their health care out of pocket.
Yes. So there's less of a chance to incur medical debt.
Right.
Because the prices aren't so exorbitant.
And also, you're not even paying for it. It's your insurance. You've already paid for it through your premiums.
You're only paying the copay. That's
You're only
what
paying the copays.
Yes.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, but I still think it's a terrible idea. Okay. I do.
Okay.
This is not really the way to do it. I believe in expunging medical debt. I do.
Really?
I do. Do I believe that it shouldn't continue to occur? Probably not. I do think it should impact your credit score in some way.
So it's like the expunging of medical debt should be a one-time thing,
Or
or in
should be-
certain
or-
circumstances?
It should be under certain circumstances, and I don't know exactly how she's going to do all this.
That's really hard, because then you need to have some kind of rules-based methodology
know.
for it.
I know.
Because otherwise you open it up to corruption. And if you do have a rules-based way to handle it, then people can exploit those.
It's interesting because I believe in getting rid of medical debt for like ideological reasons. Okay, so let's start there. I believe it for ideological reasons. Then, if I were to propose a healthcare policy, I would propose something like Medicare for All, where everyone is a part of a national health insurance program and everyone gets coverage. Okay, those two things work well in tandem. It does not work well if you get rid of all medical debt and then people just keep accumulating more debt. And then what, are we going to keep doing this over and over again? And then if we're going to keep doing this over and over again, why are we not just passing Medicare for all already? Do you think it might be a good start to get us on that track? Or do you think it's just, because I don't think it's a waste of money, because I think it will be better for everyone, and I don't think it's very expensive. But do you think it's just like, it's just bad policy?
Yeah. I'm worried about it being not only bad policy, but good politics. And kind of that leading to a bit of a death spiral, in the same way that Republicans constantly lowering people's taxes has been a bit of a death spiral, because you get people used to the lower taxes, and then no one can win a political race running on higher taxes. Right.
Which is obviously, what's funny is it's kind of what Harris is doing right now by running her whole campaign on middle class tax cuts.
Exactly.
Right. It's like when actually what this is a new welfare program for children. This is not really a tax cut.
Well, I don't know because I want to move on. If you're coming to the end of
move on.
The Medicare,
I'm done. I'm done with the healthcare stuff,
because the messaging is the interesting part that I want to talk about here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Harris says that she's got a tax cut coming for the middle class, but really it's 2 tax credits.
Right.
So it sounds much more sweeping and populist than the policy really is. Harris says that Trump is going to institute a Trump sales tax. Trump is going to put tariffs on goods. Do you think that people are possibly going to react negatively because they're going to think that they're being treated like idiots because Harris is saying that her policies are things that they aren't really?
It's a great question. I think let's start with the child tax credit. The child tax credit was framed as a tax cut when it got created back in the day.
Okay.
When Trump raised the child tax credit, he also framed it as a tax cut. So I think there is a history in America of calling the child tax credit a tax cut.
Okay.
Where it differentiates is Kamala Harris wants it to be a monthly check in your mail, not something you get at the end of tax time. That will fundamentally alter the way people's relationship to this program. It'll be more like Social Security, where you get that check in the mail as compared to your tax return.
And that will also make it politically untouchable.
Yeah, it will also make it probably politically untouchable. Then the earned income tax credit. I think it's just too wonky to go into the details that people won't even know. I think that a lot, as we know, if you watch the show, a lot of the IRS direct filing is, a lot of your tax filings can now be done directly through the IRS in a ton of states across the United States. So when you click your little button and you do your taxes, you're not really going to know that you got your earned income tax credit tripled. You're just going to see that your tax return is bigger, and you might just interpret that as a tax credit.
Yes.
So or a tax cut. So I don't think that's calling them stupid. I think that's calling them how they are going to relate to the program.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's like once these policies are implemented, this is how you'll experience them.
Yes. And I think speaking to more how they'll experience it as compared to what it really is probably more important anyway.
Okay. And you think people aren't going to look into it enough up front to have a problem with that?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
But then you mentioned the thing about the Trump sales tax, about the tariffs. I think analyzing Trump's tariff as a sales tax is the perfect way to go about this.
Really?
I think it's the perfect way to go about it.
Okay.
Because it's really, really hard to get into the weeds about how a tariff impacts your cost of bananas.
That's fair, and polling also shows that a majority of people are actually in favor of Trump's tariff plan.
Exactly. If you say, "Oh yeah, do you agree with Trump putting a tax on imported goods?" Most people say yes, because they have no idea how that affects their experience.
Yeah. And
so when Kamala calls it a Trump sales tax, which a tariff absolutely is, it's a tax on consumption, okay, which is a sales tax. Your prices go up from that, and how you experience this tariff will be higher prices at the grocery store flat out. And so I think I like the idea of proposing it as a sales tax. Do you think it's too slimy? Do you think it's too politicky? What do you think?
No, I don't. I don't care about it in like any kind of moral, ethical, or like.
You're just looking at it from a realist way. How are people, not me, going to view this?
Exactly, and I think you've made a good argument for why someone who is less plugged in will actually react positively.
Yes.
I'm just wary of anyone who is going to layer deeper, who is understanding what these platitudes actually mean.
Right.
Like being off put by the disconnect.
So that's a good point. Like, what if an undecided watches the debate and sees Kamala Harris or Tim Walz say Trump sales tax, and they look up Trump sales tax, and the first thing they see is a Politico article that says, technically it's not a sales tax, it's a tariff. That kind of looks a little slimy.
Yeah, I think it looks a little slimy, but also, but probably they'll, in the process of understanding why they're saying that, they'll be like, oh wait, but also
that kind of is a sales tax.
This could make me spend $4,000 a year more.
Yes.
Oh, like sure, maybe they were a little bit slimy, but now I actually understand the information.
Yes.
And that sucks.
And if you're not convinced about Trump's terrible effects by these tariffs, please watch one of our previous videos where I did a breakdown on how terrible these tariffs would be for the economy. Extremely important that everyone knows the stakes of that going into this election.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. What other comments do you have about her rhetoric, you think, in the pages?
This is pretty. The only other thing I would say is like, do you feel like this is at all too ticky-tacky, or like, is this too around the edges? When I think about previous like sweeping economic policy, one, for like you said in her speech, she mentioned that she's going to be really supportive of unions.
Yeah,
there isn't anything really big in her policy brief about that.
I didn't see the Pass the Pro Act in there.
No, she says that she's going to support the middle class, but this doesn't seem sweeping. There's no big reference to expansion of the social safety net, even though you can argue that the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit help with that to some extent. It's not, it's, I don't know.
No, I see what you're saying.
It doesn't feel like there's some huge ideological force at the center of this.
It's not revolutionary.
No.
I don't think. The policy document was not revolutionary.
No.
And as someone who grew up in the political landscape of Bernie Sanders, I know a revolutionary document when I read it.
Yes.
It was not this.
And that might be, I mean, that's a reaction that I have, but I don't know if that's politically bad. Like we've talked about kind of the moderate theory, or most moderate theory of elections, where generally the more moderate candidate wins the presidential election. And I think Harris is very much trying to follow that theory.
Yeah, I totally agree. But also like one of the reasons I like this is she put out this platform that seems fairly moderate with a lot of great practical solutions that I think a Bernie presidency would actually probably do anyway.
Yes.
Right. He would go one step further, but the point is, this is where he would begin. And I also think the people who she is going to appoint to a lot of these positions in the Federal Trade Commission, in the Securities and Exchange Commission, they are going to be way more focused on regulating big business in a way that I think previous administrations haven't been. Biden has fundamentally changed this and has entered us into this period of new liberalism that I think Harris is going to be a great carrier for into the future.